And we're back. And if you're joining us now, we are just getting into our second conversation for this morning. And as we mentioned before the break, we will be getting an update in relation to a lot of exciting things which are happening in the Ministry of Local Government. And so we are going to be actually talking about some proposed maps for some of the municipal boundaries, as well as some trade license reform. And joining us from the Ministry of Rural Transformation and Local Government, we have Clifford King. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, guys. Thank you all for having me. It's been a while since I've been here.
It has been, and we are very excited about this conversation. A lot to talk about, but let's start with the big one first. The expanding of municipalities across the country. It has been, I know in many different parts of the country, people are talking about whether somewhere should be a town, what the boundaries of the towns and cities are, and now you're taking a look at that. So let's start there.
Actually, we've been taking a very long look at this. It's been since 2012 that the last government said, well, it really emanated from the Belize Mayors Association. And the municipalities recognizing that they have been providing services to areas within their or around their space that really they had no jurisdiction over. Things like providing infrastructure services, street maintenance, trying to keep drains going, picking up garbage. All of those services, the councils were recognizing that they were providing these services, but they had no jurisdiction over those areas, and so people were not obligated, residents were not obligated to contribute to the tax base or to the revenue base for the council. And so that was recognized, and government said, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then we did it, and then it stalled.
Let me just stick a pin there and ask one of the questions I was asking you off camera. Is there a defined schedule set out in our laws as to when we review the borders or boundaries of municipalities, or even what qualifies a village, like let's use the famous one, Ladyville or Bay Vista, to be elevated to a town? Do we have
no, actually, unfortunately, what the law calls for is, as it is right now, the legislation gives the minister the powers to declare new urban spaces, new towns and new cities, and those are given in a schedule in the respective municipal legislation. And so right now we have 7 towns and 2 cities, and each of those have their own pieces of legislation, which is again is something that we have been endeavoring to change. It's one local government system, it's one municipal system, and so we've been advocating for a very long time to amalgamate those pieces of legislation because they essentially speak to the same things. And so there's really no need for having separate pieces of legislation. But to come specifically to your question, those are the kinds of things that we need to define. And we actually have a draft municipal legislation that sought to amalgamate those 3 pieces of legislation that have provisions now in there for how you declare a municipal space. In the case of cities, it talks about threshold of towns, 15,000 residents to be eligible to become a town, and for a city, 25,000. So we have legislation that has, well, we have draft legislation that would provide those kinds of platforms or mechanism to move from village status to township to city status. And I think it's part of the evolution that we're going through. I have told persons that since we have had a new administration, there's been a lot of impetus to move some things that we have had on my desk in the Ministry of Local Government for a very long time. And so I'm very pleased that we're slowly moving there. And you mentioned Ladyville, but there are some glaring other examples, Kikaka, the Peninsula, Placencia, Bay Vista, Independence, Trial Farm, San Narciso. Those are very glaring examples. In some instances, you have some of these spaces that are either generating more revenues than some of the smaller towns right now. And so they are on the brink. They are ready.
So let's just get that one out of the way as well. What is the significance of a village, let's say Kikaka, for example, being elevated to a town?
Really, it is an opportunity for the local authorities, the residents, to kind of determine their own development. As it is right now, villages rely heavily on central government intervention, whether it is to provide infrastructure, whether it's to maintain infrastructure, whether it is to bring in investments. And so the village councils under the Village Council Act have limited powers, limited resources, own sources of revenue. They don't even have a subvention.
So they earn money from liquor license.
Liquor license and some other small, maybe some mining fees, but those are extremely limited.
So that would be all that a village would have to earn income?
Absolutely. Kikaka, though, there are some special provisions for Kikaka right now that they are able to collect property taxes. So Kikaka strive off some semblance of property tax revenue and liquor licenses and other small fees that they collect for services that they provide, but they don't. There's no legislation for trade licensing for Kikaka, for example. And you all know that there's a very high demand for the Kikaka Village Council to provide these services. People talk about the streets in Kikaka.
Yeah.
One rain and they're gone. The Gulf Ride becomes extremely bumpy.
Yeah.
The drainage situation. One of the critical areas thing for Kikaka, though, is the matter of wastewater disposal and sewage management. That's a huge tourism center, and they don't really have a structured system for waste management, for solid waste management. They have a transfer station, but there's no sewer system. No. So people are still using the old septic tanks, and a lot of leakages happen into the lagoon, into the sea, and those kinds of things. You know.
Yeah. So that's also we're heading down because I have a lot more questions about
Absolutely.
that. But being a town. If you use Kikaka or even Bay Vista, because I'm trying to keep it diverse, allows them to be able to earn more from the businesses within the village so that they can invest more in building the village.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember the chairman of Ladyville being here, Bernardo,
Yes.
some months ago, and he talks about having 50 miles of drains that he's unable to maintain because the revenues are not there. But there's a critical issue that we also need to identify, the matter of not necessarily fleecing, but the business community choosing to go into those areas that they're not obligated to contribute to the tax base or to the revenue base of the local area.
Yeah.
And so it's perhaps in some cases diminishing the economic life of the urban space and go into a space where it is unregulated, essentially. And so there's a critical tie between what we're doing with municipal boundaries and what we're doing with trade licensing. And perhaps it's a good way to tie those two things together.
So let's just start off. I know we have a series of maps. You're looking, we talk about villages elevating to towns, but it's also expanding towns that have grown.
Yeah.
Punta Gorda, for example, Ambergris Key. I was telling Gavin when I saw the map of Ambergris Key, I asked, well, what happened to all those hotels and businesses that were outside of that boundary for a while?
Yeah, absolutely. We started this exercise back in 2012. We work on this with the Ministry of Natural Resources. They are the authority on surveying and declaring new areas. Our minister does the legal declaration, but they, as the competent authority, is involved with the surveying and the mapping. We got the approval to do this for 7 of our 9 urban spaces. So Belize City and Belmopan are not involved in this process. As a matter of fact, those boundaries for Belmopan and Belize City are established. And so we looked at San Pedro, we looked at PG, Corozal, Orange Walk, San Ignacio, and Dangriga. And really, it's not an expansion of boundaries, really. It is just the capturing of those spaces that were, quote unquote, in no man's land. They have not been a part of a village. I could give a glaring example, San Lorenzo in Orange Walk. It's a part of Orange Walk town. This one is Dangriga.
That's Dangriga,
well, this proposal here is for most of the jetty area where the jetty pier is at in Dangriga is not a part of the town boundary currently.
When last was the boundary drawn?
I have the numbers and I don't want to, but I believe it's somewhere in the 1990s. When the last boundaries for Dangriga was established. So this one is to incorporate much of the southern area of
Yeah, so
Dangriga,
that's Dangriga.
and then to go north, some areas behind the airstrip, and then to go west towards Sarawi, but before Sarawi. So there's no infringement on what
The
is
village.
traditionally known as the Sarawi boundary line.
So you're talking about Orange Walk. Let's see if we can get that map up, Sean.
Yeah, Orange Walk would be essentially the San Lorenzo area. It's a huge housing area.
Oh.
All that area that you see on the upper north there, you see the yellow lines, that's the original, that's the current boundary. And the red is now the proposed new areas.
And immediately outside of the new boundaries, Trial Farm, which you were mentioning.
Exactly.
Which is the Orange Walk version or Ladyville.
Absolutely. exactly. So that huge area above the red line is Trial Farm. And right where that red line is, or where the boundary would be, that's the line that runs west to the San Lorenzo area.
Yeah.
Again, that's an area that people have required extensive services, municipal services, garbage collection, street maintenance, drains. That area is very flood prone, and so the drainage is critical. That happens in that area. And then, of course, it goes southeast towards Palmar, and the boundary line, you're famous with the boundary road in Orange Walk,
Yeah.
that really defines that area.
Yeah. So, which town would you say would have the most significant change?
San Pedro.
San Pedro. Yeah.
San Pedro.
San Pedro was literally just
It's
a fringe
it's
on
just
the
a
entire island.
dot on a burger ski.
Yeah.
And really, San Pedro, the proposal now is to incorporate the entire island, excluding the reserve areas, Bacalar, Holchan, to exclude those, have those outside of the tongue boundaries, and to include some of the keys that are right on the periphery, the nearby keys. And really, this is critical because, I mean, the question is, you're not going to establish two municipalities on the island. You
Yeah.
don't have no need for that. It's really just to expand the jurisdiction. The council already providing the services.
So Clifford, help me understand. Are you saying that places like, let's look at the new popular area, Secret Beach, which is more north,
yeah.
very far north,
Yeah,
but a number of businesses,
Yeah.
they did not fall
They are
under
not within
the
the town
jurisdiction of the town, San Pedro
Exactly.
Town Council.
Exactly. Correct.
But the roads were
But
maintained
the
all the
roads
way
were
there.
maintained. The roads were built. You know, there's this huge concrete road that goes all the way up there,
Yeah.
and the municipality benefits none at all from that. No.
And what are some of the factors you look at when we're looking at redrawing some of the boundaries to include? I mean, San Pedro or Ambergris Creek might be a bit simpler because it's an island, but when you look at, like, going back to like Dangriga, for example, how you know, with room for expansion as well as looking at what the current situation is, what are some of the factors we look at in defining the boundaries of certain communities?
Well, one of the first things we recognize is that there's expansion of residential homes, businesses around this periphery of the established town, and people begin to demand services.
Yeah.
And naturally, as governments, you have to belong to something, to somebody. Somebody needs to be able to have jurisdiction over your space. And so those were natural factors that were taken into consideration. What we worked very hard to avoid was conflicts, where we would have gotten into conflict areas to say, why create a conflict with Sarawi and Dangriga when you don't need to do that? But let's look at where we can push the boundaries of Dangriga to include those areas that the municipality naturally would have been providing services to, improving their revenue base to deliver the services that people require. I'll give you a very glaring example of how difficult it has been for several of our municipalities, if not all of them, and we'll look at some figures a little bit later.
Yeah.
Garbage collection and disposal, an extremely significant cost. And if we look, the councils collect a fraction of what they spend on garbage collection and disposal. And so it is very important that we as a country begin to look at what do we really want to do with waste, because it's just too costly to collect it and to dispose of it. And we know that in the developed world, waste is energy. And we have not been able to get to that level where we're using waste to create energy and to, of course, then reduce the costs of managing waste. So that's very critical. That's a huge line item in terms of costs on municipal finances. And you know what happens when garbage is not picked up, right?
Yeah.
You know what happens when garbage is picked up? The whole tongue of city turns over. I mean, like people have a natural expectation that that is going to happen. In the morning I wake up, I put my garbage out, and I expect that when I come back in the afternoon that it's not there.
Yes.
Whether I pay for it or not.
Well, everywhere else pays. I think it's only Belize City.
Well, no. Actually, there's in several municipalities. I could think about a few: Corozal, Dangriga.
Really?
The legislation is there, but they
haven't been using
They
it.
haven't been able to. They have not had the will to implement the legislation. There's a garbage collection, refuse collection fees by laws
Yeah.
that require the municipalities, or at least give them the space to declare garbage collection fees.
So let me ask the question, because there are people who may be watching right now in San Lorenzo, or I'm guessing the expansion of Punta Gorda includes Indianville, because that's new.
Yeah.
How is this going to impact people living there? Does that mean that they have more fees, more taxes to pay? What difference will it make for them?
Well, it's really an opportunity for people to recognize that they can contribute, or they are to contribute to the development of their own spaces. And so now the legislation simply gives the municipal authority the authority now, the legal authority to not only deliver services, but also to collect the revenues that is required to put back into those areas. So what people can expect, really, and what they should have been doing for a very long time, is to contribute to the revenue base, and now they have the opportunity to hold their elected leaders accountable.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're using the money that you collect from this area to contribute to the maintenance of my area. And so now we're simply putting in the legal mechanism for delivery of services, but also for the obligation to people to contribute to municipal revenues that in turn comes back to providing services to those areas.
So that's from a resident's point of view. Let's talk from the business point of view with the trade license reform and
Correct.
some of the proposed changes moving forward.
Correct, yeah. Again, this is something that has been on the table for a long time, since 2014. I think I've been here at least one or two times before to talk about it.
Yes.
And we're finally now at that place where we actually have a draft piece of legislation. We have a draft bill that we continue to socialize. And really, what the trade licensing reform is talking about is how do we create predictability in the application of trade licensing as a fee? How do we create accountability, transparency in how the assessments are done? And also, how do we improve this ease of doing business in Belize? We have gone from a very complex, or we're proposing to go from a very complex and unpredictable, non-standard way of determining trade licensing to a very predictable way. It's a straightforward procedure that any businessman can say, now I can rely on this now to determine and forecast what my trade licensing fee will be going from year to year. So if we could go back though to one of the slides where I was seeing some of the finances for municipality.
Yes.
And I really want
the snapshot.
Yes, the snapshot. If we could look at that so that people can have maybe a little bit more appreciation of what is going on.
So it looks at how much they earn, their overall revenue, and their expenditure. We just had a good conversation to help with that background. There you go.
So if we could look at the blue column and the final column, really, or maybe the blue column and the second column. So we see what municipalities over the last 3 years annually they have averaged to collect. So these are average figures, and they go from Corozal to PG. Belize City being the highest, they raised about $24 million a year. But from trade licensing alone, you see that is they rely heavily on trade licensing. And so what we want to do is to stabilize this revenue for the council, but not to incur additional costs on businesses. So the elements of the reform is to look at how do we create neutrality. And so we'll talk about a little about that a little bit. But if we look at government transfers, which is in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we look at government expenditure, if we look at government transfers, if we take that out from municipal revenues, what that is showing in the last column is that most of our, if not all, I think 6 of the 9 municipalities operate in the red. So look at where your town or city is, and you will see that our cities live on borrowed money.
Yeah, the lease transfers to San Pedro.
Yeah, the lease transfers to San Pedro indeed.
Yeah.
And perhaps San Pedro will argue that they provide, as a municipality, the highest figure in terms of the GDP, what they remit to government in terms of business taxes, tourism, hotel taxes, and those kinds of things, no?
So, the trade license reform, there has been much discussion. The chamber has been involved, the conversation. I think predictability is desired by all.
Absolutely.
But it is the measuring stick that is very often used. The traditional format included space.
Yeah.
Like, how much space does your business take up? That's how much you have to pay.
Yeah.
I'm simplifying, but
Yeah.
of course you can get more technical.
If we could look at a slide that talks about the key elements of the reform, I think that will help us to guide this discussion. But what we're looking at is in terms of the determination of how the fees are being paid. We look at zoning the municipality. So as a business person, you can access your zone map to say, I am in this zone of the municipality. So we go from a zone 1 to a zone 4, with zone 1 being the highest developed area, meaning that there's commercial activity, significant commercial activity, there is easy traffic flow, the utilities are in place. It's really a very active commercial zone. So as you go from a zone 1 to a zone 4, the expectation is that your cost per square footage goes down. And then what we have also done is to categorize the businesses. So we're not lumping everyone into a barrel. We're saying that if you're in the finance sector, you're compared to others in that sector. If you're in the entertainment sector, you're compared to others in that sector. And so you take those two elements and you determine what is called an average cost of square footage. And we do have a matrix. We call it the trade matrix. And these kinds of information will be published, the zone maps, and the matrix. You see the matrix there for Orange Walk. And so if you're in a zone 1 in Orange Walk, if my vision is right, you pay about an average cost of 45 cents per square foot. And if you're in the accommodation business, the hotel business, you pay, I think that figure is, I can't tell that from here, Marlene. The accommodation business. The first one under cost per square footage, I think it says 8 cents, yes. So 8 cents if you're in the accommodation business, average. And if you're in zone 1 in Orange Walk, you pay an average cost of 45 cents. So if you bring those two together, that boils down to 26 cents per square foot. And what is measured, the point that you make is the productive space. Previously, or under the current regime, until we get this into legislation, this is Channel 5 complex. For trade licensing, this entire place would be assessed. Now, what we're saying is that we should only be looking at the productive space, the productive footprint of the building. If you walk into a restaurant, it is easy to determine the productive space. It is the dining area, it is the bar, it is the kitchen. You as a businessman provide a nice restroom as an amenity. You provide a nice parking lot to encourage patrons to come. So we're saying those are not productive areas. Those are what you put into your business space to encourage business growth. And so we're looking at productive space in that regard.
Yeah, and people may, under the current system, hesitate to expand.
Absolutely.
To make things more comfortable because it would have an implication. I know one of the common examples, no shade Gavin, is if Gavin sets up an office solely by himself, small space, as providing legal services, his income will differ from, let's say, the food shop down the street that's 2 or 3 times the size.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thank you for reminding me. Trade licensing is not about your business. It's not about how much money you make.
Yeah.
That is a separate, and as a matter of fact, I keep reminding my colleagues that trade licensing is not a tax. It is a fee that you pay because you get the permission to operate within the space. And as a municipality, you as a business person require the municipality to give you certain services, taking care of the periphery of your business so that your business space is okay. So you pay a fee for that, to get your license and to operate within a safe, healthy, regulated space. That's what you pay your fee for. The tax is a different matter. Business tax will take care of the amount of money he's making.
No, but I'm using the example of square footage as it is currently being calculated.
Well, very true. I mean, very true. So what we're saying, the productive space, and what the business community hammered for very heavily in this regard, was to say, listen, man, this huge space that I'm in, that's a property tax matter.
Yeah. Sure.
That's a property tax matter. Where I do my business from, it really has to do with the productive space that I'm using.
So let me, the reform as it is set out, how much consultation has taken place with relevant stakeholders?
There's been a lot, and there needs to be a lot more. I've been making my rounds with the village councils, the District Association of Village Council, the NAVCO, the Belize Chamber of Commerce. We still have a lot of work to do with the Realtors and the Evaluators Association. We need to do some work with the civil society organizations, with the trade union organization, because one of the things that we are proposing in this legislation is that when the trade licensing boards are set up, that the board is not open to just any and everyone. It's really by sector. So we're saying the board members will include key stakeholders, the business community, the trade union organization, the civil society organization, the realtors, the business sector, so that these are the competent sectors that will come and say, okay, how have we done this assessment? How have we determined? And so that there's a greater buy-in in terms of the decisions that are taken by the trade licensing board, as it'll impact the community, it will impact the social quality of life, and so we want key stakeholders to be on the board. And then, of course, we're doing this for villages.
Yes. And even looking at, I was trying to find the slide, where you're talking about the different zones, you're looking at developing zones and even emerging zones, places that you can see have potential to become a commercial center. Exactly.
So what we're doing for predictability purposes, once we are able to move this legislation in the first round, it goes for 3 years. So whatever your fee is in year 1, that remains as it is for year 3. So it doesn't matter what you do with your business space within that period, the fee goes from year 1 to year 3. So every 3 years, we are giving the provisions for the council to do reassessment.
Yeah.
After 3 years, a zone 4 might become a zone 3, or a zone 2 might become a zone 1, depending on the investments that the municipality would have made in that space. And so that creates stability, it creates predictability, and then, of course, all of this information is to be published. It will be legally required that this information is published. So as a businessman, I find my information, I know my productive space, I know what the rate that my municipality has declared, I can calculate my trade licensing fee.
And even having zoning options, like in what you classify as an underdeveloped zone, it will promote business opportunities in areas that have not had access before.
Exactly. So the businessman can figure out in his head, listen, I am a startup business, I need to grow my business, I will go to an area where there's least cost, but I know that I can grow gradually, incrementally. I know the investments are going to come into this area. So that's an option for me to go in. As it is right now, it doesn't matter where you go, you pay the same thing. You know, so those are the kinds of provision I think that our partners have said, listen, we are in a better place now. We are hoping that once this passes through the National Assembly, that for January 23, for new businesses, this can be applied. But we do need to talk a little bit about trade licensing in the rural areas, because there's a little variation that is very important. Can we go there?
Yes, go ahead.
For villages, we are not, there's a threshold. So we're starting only with businesses in a space, in a box, and only for those that are 600 square feet and more. And there's still a category. So if you're between 600 and 800 square feet, the proposal is that you pay an annual fee of $100, flat fee. If you're between 800 and 1,000 square feet, you pay a flat fee of $250. So anything below 600 square feet, you'll have to apply for your trade license to get your certificate, but you will not be required to pay a trade licensing fee. So the mom and pops, the street vendors, those emerging businesses in rural areas will not be obligated to pay a trade licensing fee, except though that we want them to apply for a license, because it's part of the regulation to control the space, to identify who the business people are and so on. And then if you're above 1,000 square feet, The proposal is that we look at the municipal scheme that is nearest to you to say, okay, you are above 1,000 square feet. We apply as the zoning scheme, we apply the rate, we apply the productive space concept, the average cost per square footage. So we apply that to the larger investments, those that are above 1,000 square feet. And we think that that provides some level of equity while addressing the issues of emerging businesses. And so we think that's a fair approach. To control the movement, transitioning of businesses from rural to urban spaces and back and forth and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that those kinds of provisions
It's
helps.
to dissuade people from moving to an area where they're going to pay less.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. And of course, you welcome the investment. It's just that they can be able to return it to the municipality.
And just in case the farmer is worried, the agriculturist, the agricultural lands are exempted from these. So we're not looking at, you're not going to measure your cane field or your citrus orchard or your pig pen or your chicken run. Those areas are exempted. What we're looking at is the processing or manufacturing plant that you may have.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of extensive work and a lot of thought has gone into this, and perhaps that is one of the reasons why the iterations have grown, change over the years, and so.
So what's the timeline that we're looking at?
Well, the timeline is that we have a bill now,
Yes.
and very shortly in the next week or so, we'll be taking that bill to cabinet for presentation to say this is what the draft legislation look like, and then cabinet determine when it goes to the National Assembly. And once it gets there, the process of going through the House committee meetings and additional representation from the business community, the public at large. And if there is need, it goes back to final drafting if recommendations are given for amendments or addition. So that opportunity still lies. But the anticipation is that we have an effective date for January 1st, 2023. So we have 9 months or so to do a lot more work in terms of the logistical details and meeting with other stakeholders.
And for the stakeholders who are watching saying, I have lots of questions about this, who do they contact? Where do they get more information?
You could go, there's the option to go directly to the municipal body. As a matter of fact, the Belize City Council has done a lot of public consultations. There's one on for this Thursday night, Belize City. We have done some in Belmopan. Some of the other municipalities required to do some of that. So in the first instance, they can go to the municipal body, but they could also come to us at the ministry to discuss how this is going to impact. As a matter of fact, we have some working sessions with some of the key groups still in the making. The Justice of the Peace Association, like I said, the Congress, the Trade Union Congress, the Realtors and Valuators Association. We still want to continue to do this, have this kind of discussions with our partners.
All right. Well, we are grateful for you to come in and to share some of the information. We know it's absolutely important that people know these moves are being made. And we look forward to having future discussions as well.
Absolutely. And of course, there are some other things that we're working on in ministry that we think that is worth the public knowledge. One of the critical one is looking at climate resiliency. We just off a huge municipal tour a few weeks ago, and we saw some of the glaring challenges that municipalities face, and some of them have to do with unplanned development, but we're seeing the impacts of climate change. And we need to invest to mitigate, adapt. So we're working on that as well. No?
All right. Well, we're going to have to get you back for that conversation another time. Kapoor, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and call us back.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll get the details of the Queen's Baton Relay. So please stay tuned.